In the brutal, sprawling conflict of World War II, where entire continents became battlefields, the most relentless and insidious enemy was often unseen. It didn't fire bullets or drop bombs. It was an enemy that lurked in stagnant puddles, flowed in contaminated streams, and waited patiently in the mud of 1,000 trenches. This invisible foe was disease, and in an army, it could claim more lives than all the firepower combined. For a soldier, thirst was a constant companion, but taking a drink from the wrong source could be a death sentence, a one-way ticket to a hospital bed, or, worse, a shallow grave. The history of warfare is littered with campaigns lost not to a superior force, but to a foe no soldier could shoot. Waterborne illnesses. The American Civil War saw dysentery and typhoid ravage both sides, and in World War I, the trench-bound armies faced unimaginable sanitary conditions. By the time World War II erupted, military planners were fully aware of this devastating threat. They knew that an army, no matter how well equipped, was only as strong as its weakest link, and that weak link was often a dehydrated soldier succumbing to cholera in the North African desert or dysentery in the muddy, sodden fields of France. For the soldier on the ground, the reality was even starker. Water, the very substance needed for life, became a source of terror. A patrol moving through the jungle of the Pacific Islands might be surrounded by water, streams, rain, and thick humidity, but every drop was suspect. The water that looked clean was teeming with microscopic pathogens that could cause debilitating sickness. In Europe, the landscape was a mosaic of polluted farmlands, bomb-cratered streets, and trenches turned into open sewers. Finding a clean source of water was a constant, nerve-wracking gamble. It was a problem that had to be solved not just with strategy and firepower, but with discipline, planning, and a deep understanding of survival. A soldier could march for a week with a half-empty stomach, but a day without water could render him useless. 2 days could kill him. The stakes were impossibly high. Military doctrines were rewritten to account for this. The U.S. Army field manuals began to contain entire sections dedicated to water discipline and purification. But a manual, like any piece of paper, was useless without the ingenuity and grit to follow its instructions under fire. Supply lines, no matter how efficient, were fragile things. They could be stretched thin by a lightning-fast advance or completely severed by an enemy ambush. A soldier advancing through Normandy or pushing through the dense forests of the Ardennes couldn't expect a pristine water bottle to be waiting for them at every turn. They had to become their own supply chain, their own chemist, and their own survival expert. The fight against invisible pathogens required a different kind of bravery. It wasn't the heroic charge across a field under fire, but the quiet, agonizing decision to risk dehydration over a potential dose of typhoid. It was the mental fortitude to endure a parched throat for hours on end, knowing that the stagnant creek just ahead was a beautiful lie. This constant, simmering threat was a psychological burden as heavy as any pack. It forced soldiers to think strategically about every drop, to hoard, to ration, and to share. It created a bond forged not just in combat, but in the shared struggle against a silent killer. In this context, a canteen wasn't just a container. It was a symbol of hope. The purification tablet wasn't just a piece of medicine. It was a tiny, life-saving chemical miracle. And the knowledge of how to turn a muddy puddle into a drinkable liquid was more valuable than gold. These were not just survival tricks for the sake of survival. They were mission-critical procedures. An army that can't stay on its feet because of illness is an army that will not win. The soldiers' fight for clean water was a core part of the larger conflict, a battle waged in silence, in the muck and the mud, far from the headlines and history books. It was a fight that, if lost, could bring an entire war machine to its knees. When a soldier was issued his kit, every single item had a purpose. There was no fluff, no luxury, and nothing was taken for granted. In the rucksack, nestled between his mess kit and his ammunition pouches, was a canteen, a simple, curved bottle that was a soldier's most cherished possession. But the canteen was only the starting point. The real value was in the means to fill it safely, and for this, the Allied armies provided an array of essential tools and chemicals. The most common and widely distributed of these was the halazone tablet. Developed in the United States, these tiny, unassuming tablets came in small glass vials, each containing enough of the chemical to treat a full canteen of water. The core principle was simple. Each tablet contained an active ingredient that, when dissolved, would release a measured dose of chlorine. This chlorine was powerful enough to kill most of the common bacteria and protozoa that cause diseases like giardiasis, dysentery, and cholera. The instructions were equally straightforward. Fill the canteen with the suspect water, drop in one tablet, shake vigorously to dissolve, and then wait a mandatory 30 minutes. That waiting period was often the hardest part, a test of a soldier's discipline against the burning thirst. The treated water had a distinct, medicinal taste, a sharp, metallic tang that was a small price to pay for the assurance of life. The tablets were a marvel of logistical efficiency and chemical engineering, a small, portable solution to a massive problem. They were not perfect, they didn't filter out dirt or heavy metals, and they were less effective against certain stubborn pathogens and viruses, but in the field, they were nothing short of a lifesaver. Even more fundamental than chemical purification was the timeless method of boiling. This was the gold standard, the one technique that was almost universally reliable against all waterborne pathogens, from bacteria and viruses to parasites. The principle is simple. Heat water to a rolling boil for a minimum of 1 minute, and the high temperature will destroy the cellular structure of any living organisms within it. While simple in theory, it was fraught with challenges in a combat zone. Boiling required a heat source, which in a modern war meant a fire. A fire produces smoke, and smoke can be seen for miles. A fire at night produces a telltale glow. A soldier or a small unit could be giving away their position just to have a drink of water. For this reason, boiling was often done under cover of darkness or in a heavily wooded area, and only when absolutely necessary. Soldiers learned to use their mess kits, often a collapsible cup and tray, over a fire fueled by anything they could find, small twigs, pieces of wood, or the solid fuel tablets that were also part of their field gear. It was a slow, deliberate process, but it was a non-negotiable step when chemical tablets weren't available. As an alternative to halazone, some units were issued tincture of iodine. Like the tablets, a few drops of this common antiseptic could turn a canteen of bad water into a life-sustaining liquid. Iodine was often favored for its more powerful, broad-spectrum efficacy, but it came with a significant downside, a much stronger, more unpleasant taste that many soldiers found difficult to stomach. The psychological aspect of drinking was just as important as the physical. The taste of iodine was a constant, bitter reminder of the hostile environment, a flavor that could gnaw at a soldier's morale just as much as a lack of food. These official methods, the standard issue tools, were the front line of defense against the invisible enemy. But war is chaotic, and supplies are not endless. A patrol could lose its vial of halazone tablets. A fuel tablet could get wet. A soldier could find himself cut off from his unit with nothing but his canteen and his wits. The official manual could only take you so far. It was in these moments, when a soldier's training was pushed to its limits, that they had to rely on a different kind of knowledge, the kind passed down through whispered advice, hard-won experience, and sheer necessity. The official kit was the foundation, but the improvisational tricks were the ultimate survival plan, a testament to the fact that in the dirtiest trenches, human ingenuity was the most powerful tool of all. For every official piece of kit, there was an improvised trick that could save a life when supplies ran out or the situation demanded quick thinking. These were the lessons learned in the field, born of necessity and passed from veteran to rookie like sacred knowledge. They were not in a manual, but they were the difference between life and death. Trick 1. The sock filter. The first and most basic rule of water purification was to remove the obvious. In the war-torn countryside of France or the thick jungles of Burma, a soldier's only immediate water source might be a muddy puddle or a stagnant ditch. A canteen full of mud was useless, and boiling it would only kill the bugs, not remove the grit. A simple, but effective, solution was to use a piece of clothing as a preliminary filter. A clean sock, a strip torn from a shirt, or a piece of cloth from a pack could be used to strain the water before any further treatment. While this did nothing to address the microscopic pathogens, it was an essential first step. It removed the large particles of dirt, leaves, and debris, making the water visually clearer and easier to handle. This act was often the first measure a soldier would take, a small but significant gesture of control in an otherwise chaotic and filthy environment. The sight of murky water slowly dripping through a piece of cloth into a canteen was a small victory, a psychological boost that signaled the start of a survival process. Trick 2. The charcoal filter. After using a sock to remove the larger particles, a soldier could elevate their field craft with a more advanced improvised filter. If a fire had been made to boil water or for warmth, the leftover charred wood was a valuable resource. Charcoal, the product of burnt organic material, is highly porous and an excellent natural filter. A soldier could crush this charred wood into a fine powder and then layer it with sand and small stones inside a makeshift container. A punctured tin can, a hollowed-out piece of bamboo, or even a canteen with holes punched in the bottom could serve as the filter's body. The layers of charcoal, sand, and gravel created a crude but surprisingly effective purification system. As the water was poured in, it would slowly seep through the layers, with the charcoal absorbing impurities and significantly reducing the foul taste and odor that plagued contaminated water sources. While this method, like the sock filter, was not foolproof against pathogens, it made the water far more palatable, which was crucial for morale and the motivation to drink. The cleaner taste made it easier to consume enough water to stay hydrated. Trick 3. Solar purification. In sun-drenched climates, particularly in North Africa or the Pacific, the sun itself became a purification tool. The principle behind this was simple science, even if the soldiers themselves didn't understand the full microbiological process. By filling a clear plastic bottle or a glass container with water and placing it in direct sunlight for at least 6 hours, a soldier could harness the power of the sun's ultraviolet UV rays. The UV radiation penetrates the water and damages the DNA of most bacteria, viruses, and parasites, rendering them harmless. For this to work, the water had to be relatively clear. If it was too cloudy, the light couldn't get through. This method, now known as SODI's, solar disinfection, was a patient man's trick. It required discipline and foresight. A soldier couldn't simply grab a drink and go. They had to prepare the water hours in advance, a testament to the fact that field survival was a waiting game as much as a desperate sprint. Trick 4. The improvised still. This was the most complex, but also the most effective of all the field tricks. It was the only way to guarantee the removal of virtually all pathogens, dissolved minerals, and chemical contaminants. The process of distillation was a scientific marvel that could be recreated with minimal equipment. A soldier would need a heat source, a container to boil the water, and a way to collect the resulting steam. A typical setup involved boiling water in a can or metal vessel. A second, cooler container would be positioned to catch the steam as it rose and condensed. A piece of cloth or even a plastic sheet could be draped over the steam, and the purified water would drip down into a clean cup. This process was slow and laborious, but it produced water that was completely sterile and tasted clean. It was the gold standard for survival, a way to turn even the saltiest or most polluted water into a life-sustaining liquid. The makeshift still was the ultimate expression of a soldier's will to survive, a practical application of physics in the most dire of circumstances. Trick 5. The two-canteen method. This was a highly practical variation on the improvised still. It was designed to work with the standard issue gear, making it a favorite among experienced patrols. A soldier would fill their canteen cup with contaminated water and place it over a small, controlled fire. Then, they would invert a second, empty canteen over the boiling cup, making sure it was secure. As the water in the cup heated and turned to steam, the vapor would rise and condense on the cooler, inverted canteen. The soldier would then slowly and carefully unscrew the cap of the inverted canteen, allowing the newly distilled water to drip down into a clean cup or into the empty canteen. This method was a testament to the ingenuity of soldiers working with what they had. It turned two simple pieces of equipment into a complete purification system, a clever trick born from a deep understanding of thermodynamics and the desperate need for a drink. Trick 6. Sand and gravel. This trick, perhaps the oldest of all, was a field technique for finding a naturally filtered water source. Rather than taking water directly from a river or pond, a soldier would find a spot on the bank and dig a small hole, a few feet away from the main body of water. As the soldier dug, the water would slowly begin to seep into the new hole. As it moved through the layers of sand, gravel, and earth, the larger particles would be trapped, and some of the smaller contaminants would be absorbed. The water that collected in this seepage well was often noticeably clearer and cleaner than the source water. While it still required further purification, boiling, or chemical treatment, it was a way to find a better, more manageable source in a world of filth. It was a patient, methodical trick that required observation and a willingness to put in the effort. Trick 7. Observation. Finally, before any of these tricks were applied, the most important step was to look. A soldier's eyes were the first and best defense. They learned to assess a water source for signs of life. Was the water running? Running water was generally safer than standing water. Were there insects and other small creatures living in it? The presence of life could indicate a healthier ecosystem, but it could also mean more pathogens. Experienced soldiers learned to avoid stagnant, oily-looking puddles or water with a foul smell. They would look for small springs, which were often a purer source, or for clean rainwater that collected on leaves. This was not a physical trick, but a mental one, an act of caution and field awareness that was instilled in every soldier. It was the ultimate, non-technical first step, a critical piece of the survival puzzle that could prevent a soldier from even attempting to purify a source that was beyond hope. These 7 tricks were not just about staying hydrated. They were about a soldier's will to live, a testament to their resilience and resourcefulness in the face of an enemy that they couldn't see, hear, or shoot. A soldier's mission, from the jungles of the Pacific to the forests of Germany, was more than just a series of military objectives. It was a test of human endurance, a physical and psychological marathon fought not just against an enemy force, but against the constant assault of fatigue, stress, and the grinding elements of a hostile environment. In this context, the struggle for clean water was not a footnote. It was a central part of the story, a daily battle that was just as critical as the one fought with bullets and bombs. The ability to find and purify water was a powerful, silent weapon in a soldier's arsenal. The discipline required to endure the lack of water was as significant as any field tactic. It was the mental fortitude to resist the primal urge to drink from the first puddle you saw, knowing that even a single sip could render you incapacitated. It was the patience to wait for a bottle to sit in the sun for hours, or the discipline to start a fire and boil water under the cover of night, risking detection for the sake of survival. This struggle was not just about thirst, it was about a soldier's resolve. A soldier who lost control over his own physical needs was a soldier who could no longer be trusted to hold the line. This is why the principles of water purification were drilled into a soldier's mind until they became instinct. The tricks and techniques were a legacy of survival, a form of folk knowledge passed down not through official training manuals, but through the crucible of shared experience. The veteran soldier, with his sun-weathered face and weary eyes, was a walking library of survival knowledge. He taught the new recruits how to find a seepage well, how to rig a two-canteen still, and how to spot the subtle signs of a tainted water source. This passing of knowledge created a powerful bond, a trust built on the understanding that one man's expertise could save another man's life. It was a form of brotherhood that went beyond the battlefield, a shared understanding of what it took to stay alive when everything around you was trying to kill you. The very act of teaching these tricks was a ritual, a silent promise to look out for one another. In the end, it was not the technology that always won the day. The most advanced rifle could not stop a microscopic virus. The most powerful tank could not run on a feverish crew. The true story of survival in the mud and filth of World War II was the triumph of the human spirit. It was the ingenuity to use a sock as a filter, the patience to wait for the sun to do its work, and the discipline to endure a thirsty march. These simple, often dirty, tricks were the true keys to survival, and they stand as a powerful testament to the fact that even the most advanced war machine depends on the resilience and resourcefulness of the humans who operate it. The war was a marathon of hardship and endurance. Every step, every choice, and every drop of water was part of a plan to stay alive and focused. A soldier's greatest weapon was not the one he carried, but the one he possessed, his will to live. It's a powerful reminder that in the most challenging moments, the most important tool you have is your own ingenuity. And it was that ingenuity, applied to the most basic of human needs, that helped a generation of soldiers survive the invisible war and return home.